I'm Priya Stevenson,
And I'm Charmaine Wood.
with your news tonight on Court TV. The criminal trial for Louise Woodward, held on October 7, 1997, is one which has shocked the nation. The alleged baby killer had been found guilty of second-degree murder, but Judge Hillard B. Zobel, in a post-conviction hearing, took it upon himself to reduce the sentence to manslaughter. Let's take a closer look at this case.
Louise Woodward was born on February 28, 1978 in Elton, Cheshire, England. Woodward was a young English au pair for the Epen in Newton, Massachusetts. An au pair is a domestic assistant from a foreign country working for and living as part of a host family. Louise was given responsibilities that consisted of taking care of the Epen's baby Matthew, as well as some housework. It all started on February 4, 1997, when Matthew collapsed and stopped breathing while in the care of Louise Woodward. Woodward had been 19 years old while she cared for the 8-month-old for multiple hours. After Matthew collapsed, he was rushed to Boston's Children's Hospital. Soon after being admitted into the hospital, Matthew fell into a coma. On February 5th, Woodward was arrested, and police said she admitted to popping Matthew onto a pile of towels. She pleads not guilty to battery of a child and is sent to Framingham Women's Prison. There was a confusion in the definition of popping. When Woodward said she popped Matthew, she meant she placed him down, not hitting him. 5 days later, on February 9th, Matthew lost the battle and died. His death resulted from a fractured skull and subdermal hematoma. Subdermal hematoma is a collection of blood in the space between the outer and middle layers of the covering of the brain. It is most often caused by torn bleeding veins as a result of head trauma. These injuries are believed to be from shaken baby syndrome, which is a medical theory that explains a form of child abuse when an infant is shaken violently by a caretaker. It creates a whiplash motion that results in severe brain injury, lifelong disability, and in this case, death. The heartache did not end for Woodward after the death of the baby. Instead, Woodward received notice that the state of Massachusetts had filed suit against her. The trial became a criminal trial due to the charge of second-degree murder. On February 13th, she pled not guilty, but did not receive bail. On March 5th, 1997, Woodward faces charges of first-degree murder, which was decided by Middlesex grand jury. A jury of her peers would make the final decision during the trial. Massachusetts v. Woodward was intensely covered by the media.
The main arguments of the defense, led by Harvey Silvergate, Andrew Good, and Barry Scheck, include the fact that upon bringing young Matthew into the hospital, his skull fracture had already shown signs of healing, indicating the injuries could have been caused up to several weeks before the incident. Medical testimonies from Dr. Jan Leesma, Joseph Medson, a renowned brain surgeon, and Dr. Gerald Fain, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, also support the claim that the injuries were not recent. The defense also requested to have an all-or-nothing verdict, meaning that Judge Zobel could only allow the jury to return with a verdict of first- or second-degree murder. Anything less would be considered not guilty. Despite the tries of the defense, Woodward was found guilty of second-degree murder on October 30th, 1997. The sentence is life in prison with at least 15 years without parole.
3 days after the previous sentence, on November 4th, Judge Zobel received a notice from the defense to reduce the charge of second-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter. After 6 days, on November 10th, Judge Zobel reduced the jury's verdict to involuntary manslaughter. After hearing this decision, the prosecution, which consisted of Singh and Assistant District Attorney Leon, requested an appeal of the reduced charge on November 25th. They wanted Woodward to return to prison. On December 27, 1997, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Abrams rejects a prosecution bid to have Woodward return to prison immediately. She decides to bypass the lower appeals court and have the prosecution and defense present directly to the Supreme Judicial Court in March in order to speed up the process. Judge Zabel determined that Woodward's appeal would be heard on March 6, 1998. Months before the appeal, the EF affair stopped paying for Woodward's appeal. The financial charges were then taken care of by Woodward's supporters.
The defense's main argument for appeal was that there would have been medical confirmation of Matthew's injuries beginning to heal if the defense's lead medical expert, Dr. Baden, had been given properly preserved physical evidence from the autopsy. The defense claimed that they weren't given all of the evidence which the prosecution had access to. Woodward had even asked to allow her own medical expert to perform an additional autopsy, but her request was denied. The argument that the defense had not received all of the physical evidence was supported by the claim made by Dr. Liesma that sections of the dura removed from Matthew's brain during the autopsy had vital pieces missing when trying to determine the cause and age of the injuries. This claim was dismissed because Dr. Fain was not notified to preserve all of the evidence as requested by Woodward. Woodward had also argued theory that, as described by her medical experts, if the child was handled even slightly roughly, the healing injuries could reopen and start to bleed again, resulting in Matthew's death. The act of handling Matthew slightly rough could be something as innocent as placing him in his crib or a pile of towels with any force. The other main argument was that Judge Zobel had made an error in criminal procedure. Zobel, upon Woodward's request, did not instruct the jury on manslaughter, only first and second-degree murder. He also neglected to instruct the jury on the prosecution's burden of proof for murder, as to the exact date when the injuries occurred. Judge Zobel also neglected to instruct the jury on the burden which the prosecution carried to prove the injuries weren't caused by accident. Due to procedural error, the defense argued that all charges should be dropped.
Singh, the opening prosecutor, criticized the judge for the reduction. The prosecution argued that the defense did not have a claim for the appeal. They argued that the defense had neglected the time they had in receiving the medical records and paperwork that the prosecution had. There was a decision that Judge Zobel's sentencing was not relevant and that Woodward would be resentenced by another Supreme Court judge. This decision was determined due to the multiple errors Judge Zobel demonstrated throughout the trial. Zobel's errors were that he would not consider the effect the death of Matthew had on others, and he neglected to instruct the jury on manslaughter. It was decided by a 4-3 vote that Woodward would be charged with involuntary manslaughter and was able to return to England immediately due to the time served. In addition to this decision, Woodward cannot care for other people's children or receive any financial gain that may have established through the media coverage.
In hindsight, what do you think of the case?
There was definitely someone at fault for the child's death. I do not believe there is enough evidence to have a verdict of murder or involuntary manslaughter towards Woodward. The case seemed to be centralized around Matthew's injuries, but since it was determined that the injuries were weeks old, there is no guarantee that they were inflicted by Woodward.
I agree. I think that Judge Zobel's many errors could result in the retrial, which did occur, but I believe that the lack of concrete evidence against Woodward, especially in such a serious conviction, whether it be murder or manslaughter, should result in a verdict of not guilty. Yes, the parents want closure, but putting away an innocent woman who I believe shouldn't have been proven guilty with a large lack of evidence just to have someone to blame is unjust. Woodward now resides in her hometown in England as a happily married dance instructor watching children of her own. Although she may have moved on and put the past behind, the Ethans, as well as several nations across the globe, will forever remember this case. Thank you for joining us tonight on Court TV. See you tomorrow.